All right, Kent. So we are live. We are here with Kent Loudon, a wolf specialist for the Department of Fish and Wildlife based in Redding. He's studying and helping manage California's small wolf population. The Shasta Pack produced 5 pups in Siskiyou County in 2015. The Lassen Pack produced 3 pups this year. Last week, the DFW announced the finding that the 3 pups were found and the mother in Lassen County. Not saying exactly where for obvious reasons. Um, now, the first question I have for you, Kent, is it had to be like a needle in the haystack to find these pups in Lassen County. How did you?
Yeah, well, this has been going on for I think about a year now, and so folks before me, department folks and Forest Service biologists, have been tracking first an individual and then a pair of wolves in the same general area last year. They tracked them through regular old-fashioned way, tracks and scat, and trail cams, and through fall. They kind of disappeared for the winter, or you can imagine that it's sometimes it might be a little bit tougher during the winter. This spring we were on it again. This time I joined the team starting May 1st. And then actually Forest Service biologists really started to find some tracks in a new area. I think this area is about 10-15 miles, just to give you some scope or some scale there, away from the areas that they were known to hang out in the year before. They're pretty distinctive looking. The female's kind of got a bend in her tail, so we know it's the same wolves. The Forest Service biologists did a really good job finding new tracks in a new place, and then we concentrated all of our efforts onto that and really saw some really steady patterns. So we knew that they were localized in the area, and we knew that we had enough then to begin a trap line to start trapping to radio collar. During that entire time, the scouting continued throughout we were pretty sure that they had pups. And so, yeah, the scouting went on throughout that entire time to find the pups.
Okay. And has the Siskiyou County pack been located lately?
No, as you know, again, that's all before me. So as I understand it, what's known about them is they did not rear pups in the same general area as the previous year. The thought is that they may no longer be a pack with some scattered individuals. Maybe one of those individuals was known to be in Nevada last fall. Through genetics, they determined that. One of the offspring, one of the pups. So right now they're either no longer a pack or they have shifted territory. We have not had time to really to search those areas, adjacent areas that they might have gone to, and that's probably our next step right now. Is I'll start looking at those areas.
Okay. So we know there's one wolf collared in California. We know there are 3 pups. Is there an estimate of how many more wolves there are in California?
No, so that's the only pack that we know of right now. Is the male and the female. We actually have since determined that there's at least 4 pups now, 6 animals in this pack. Beyond that, we know that there's some individuals through radio collars or through uncollared wolves with trail cams that have passed through portions of California. Some have gone back to Oregon. It's a good guess that there's probably a small handful of individuals floating around out there. Those animals, dispersing animals, can travel very far, very quickly, and are nearly impossible to keep tabs on.
Okay. So is it fair to assume that the number of wolves in California will only grow? And if so, is there a holding capacity given the habitat?
That's a really good question, I think, and that gets a little bit complex. But what you would probably look at the deer and elk layer out there. Of course, wolves need something to eat, and they mostly rely on big game species. And so I don't know that anyone's done a very thorough job yet to look at those areas that wolves could actually be in, number one, that have decent numbers of deer and elk. And then number two, they're pretty territorial. And so what's been shown in lots of other places is about average territory size of 200 square miles for a pack. That would include both summer and winter range. And so if I guess if one wanted to do some quick, dirty napkin math, you could look at areas of ungulate populations that were abundant and carve out 200 square mile polygons on them. They have some kind of a very rough idea.
Okay. Okay.
Wolves need large landscapes.
Right. Okay. When news came out last week, as you know, about the Lassen pack up here in the rural north anyway, the public reaction was pretty split between people who were excited about the return of wolves for the first time in 90 years in California and people who were fearful of the effect on livestock and deer populations. So let's take those one at a time if we could. You've worked as a wolf specialist for 20 years in Montana, Idaho, Arizona, and now California. What was your experience, especially in Montana, with regard to how wolf packs affected first the livestock?
Well, certainly anytime that wolves are in livestock, it's a concern. From a big, if you look at a regional or even a statewide scale, wolves don't really have a strong impact on livestock, negative impacts on livestock. The real issues are more on an individual basis for a particular producer here and there. And at times it can be significant. So what we really try to do is try to communicate and coordinate on the ground with folks that are operating livestock in and amongst wolves and really see how anything that we can do to actually prevent depredations or conflict from occurring. And so we work pretty hard at that. Of course, the next thing that happen is if we do have conflicts, how can we stop them? How can we minimize damage?
Okay.
And no doubt, for sure, not to make it sound like it's easy or anything, that is tricky business. Nothing's 100%. But we also do have the case lots of times that wolves are rearing their pups right in the middle of a grazing allotment. And it's the case, for instance, in Montana, Idaho, anywhere that has wolves, where you have pack members that are literally walking through livestock every single day.
Interesting.
And occasionally, a pack can start to kill livestock.
So the DFW made it pretty clear in their management report released at the end of last year that there would be no depredation permits for owners of livestock. So what actions can ranchers take to protect their animals short of that?
Right. So right now it is pretty limited here in California. So non-injuriously harassing wolves. So if you do find wolves harassing your livestock, if it were me, for instance, certainly I would chase them off. And of course, you're within your legal right to do that. Chase them off. Other than that, so that's hazing actually in the act. But other than that, we could try some non-lethal measures where we have flaggery, for instance, red flags on a rope that we can hang up in like calving pastures, for instance. It's a deterrence that came from Eastern Europe. There's something about it that wolves don't like to cross it. And now we've added turbo hot wire to it. So if they do become habituated to the flaggery, they might test it and then get shocked and reinforce, oh yeah, this stuff's scary. None of that stuff is 100%, but there's lots of anecdotal information that says it does work for at least a little while. Maybe some months, maybe that's all you need to get you through the main calving season. And there's places that more and more it's becoming popular. Ranchers themselves are even putting it up in places in Montana, for instance.
And to be clear, when you say chase them off, you're talking about on an ATV or a horse, right?
Or just running off after them. It's important to note it has to be in a non-injurious way. So, yeah, so you might not have time. I mean, you're probably, if you can imagine, this is how I imagine it's happening all of a sudden in front of you. What do? You run out there after them. So
somebody would actually run after them.
You might not have time to saddle up the horse or whatever.
Okay. Okay. Let's switch to deer and elk. What was your experience again in Montana with regard to how the packs affected the populations?
Well, as a general, just as a general statement, it was kind of interesting that we had places in Montana where elk were declining in the presence of wolves. We had places in Montana where elk were declining in the absence of wolves. We had places in Montana where elk were increasing in the presence of wolves. So all of the various combinations that you could have. One of the more famous ones there is the Yellowstone Northern Range herd that a good portion of those animals wintered in Montana, and that population has declined quite a bit. And wolves are probably in there somewhere with all of the other factors out there. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in 95 and 96, in 96 and 97, there was a very severe winter, especially measured by snow. And I don't know what it would be as far as event, but 1 in 200, 1 in 500 year event. It was big snow. I was living in Montana at the time, and so that snow really was a big impact on ungulate herds from Wyoming through Idaho, Montana. That population too, because Yellowstone National Park and the lack of predators or hunting, was a very overpopulated herd. So you could think of not just overpopulated and having the ability to even have some destruction to their own habitat, but also would be very vulnerable to predation once the lion population increased during that time. Black bear, grizzly bear populations increased during that time, and of course wolves were added onto that. So you can imagine a very large, probably very old population, lots of old aged animals in that because it's a not hunted population, and so pretty vulnerable to predation. And that's what happened is the predators, plus there's a hunting season in Montana to try to decrease that population because it was too big. And then there were several years of drought afterwards. All of those things in combination work to effectively decrease that population. Of course, wolves got the blame for all of it.
Right, right. And it's worth noting that the deer populations in California, northeastern California anyway, the mule deer populations have been going down for years. It's fair to say that they will continue to go down for years. And now that wolves are introduced, they might indeed get the blame for that. But it's been going on in California forever. My question, though, is there been a study in Montana that estimates how many deer or elk a single wolf or a pack of wolves can kill in a year?
Well, there's a whole bunch. I have a lot of thoughts about all of that. It is interesting, here we're talking about mule deer principally, and I think it is the experience of, I think, throughout all of the western states that mule deer populations have been declining for at least a couple decades now. Deer biologists have been working for a long time now with conferences and research and discussing what's happening, trying different things, for sure. So that is an interesting thing. And I do know that the state of California, and it's in our wolf management plan too, to start research that actually begins to answer those questions. So yes, maybe it's true that mule deer are declining. What would be the additive effect of wolves, for instance, on the landscape?
Mhm.
As well as, all of the lions and the bears out there as well. Um, I think as a general rule, but wolves, you could equate like a single wolf. People like to do this. May take on average something like an ungulate every 22 weeks, 22 weeks or something like that. So every other week, essentially. But of course, predation rates really change. Predation rates probably increase during very severe winters, decrease during mild winters. I don't know how that affects California because winter range is probably a lot different here than what I'm used to up north. Um, and then winter predation rates versus spring and summer, because so you can think about adult animals or those fawns going through their first winter is a lot different than the young fawns or calves on the ground right now too. So predation rates certainly differ throughout the year, if that makes any sense, and they can differ from year to year. But as a general rule, that's a number that's thrown out there a lot, 20 on average throughout the year per wolf. It is important to note too that what we look at is the difference between additive and compensatory mortality. And so the additive mortality is wolves killing an animal that otherwise would have lived. Compensatory mortality is a wolf that kills an animal that's going to die anyway. So in that case of like a severe winter, and you have some animals, some proportion of animals in that herd are not going to make it to green up. Wolves and coyotes as well are very good. That's what they specialize in, is removing animals that are having a difficult time anyway. As opposed
Okay.
to a lion, for instance, that's an ambush predator, who they're more less selective in their kills. They're more like the next one that's coming under this rock's getting it, kind of thing. So
A question about hunting opportunities as we see deer herds continue to decrease, opportunities via tags have also decreased. Is there, do you see a time when numbers decrease so that the wolves continue to have a source of food? So in other words, fewer hunters hunting deer so that the wolves can continue to hunt the deer.
I'm far too new here so I've only started with the department in May, and I really have not had the time to look at what our regular deer biologists or our unit biologists are doing with those deer herds. And I think I understand that there's a lot of variability of the strength of those herds on the landscape, but I would think that deer and elk population managers will not only just through research but through surveys adjust tags, and this is just regular wildlife management stuff. Adjust tags according to what they think is good for the population for whatever reasons that are causing populations to go up or down.
So the DFW will be watching the prey populations pretty closely throughout these first few years.
I think that's what fish and game agencies do all the time anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So one last question. It's about human interactions with wolves in Montana. Of course, some hunting was allowed, and I'm sure that made the wolves fear people. In California, where no hunting will be allowed, do you think is there a chance that the wolves will lose their fear and respect for people and cause more human conflicts?
Well, I think the thing you'd start out first with this, that wolves are pretty timid critters in general. So wolves fear people and they try to stay away from them. But having said that, I think that there's always a proportion of the population that is just kind of curious. They're visual learners. So there are, you could have wolves. It probably tends to be younger wolves that just kind of will sit there, stare at you like, huh, what is that? And kind of hang out. Of course, people that don't know wolves, it might make them kind of nervous. But I always say this too, like, Hollywood, for instance, exaggerates things quite a bit. typically, but I like the Dances with Wolves thing with Kevin Costner, and that wolf is coming by to check him out. I think that there are some individuals in the population that are actually kind of like that. I think that's how man domesticated the dog a long, long time ago. So, but otherwise, in general, they tend to be pretty timid critters. They stay away from people. Does hunting have an effect on the population as a whole to increase that? I don't really know if I would make a case for that or not. And I think even with hunting, I think you would still have the young animals that kind of don't get it. You might see some campers or backpackers and might just check them out a little bit or stay there and stare at them. So I think on the other hand, what is clear though, and this is besides your point, but maybe gets at your point from a different angle, is so there's a trapping season in Idaho and Montana. And as far as the population becoming wise to trapping, that certainly is a big thing. They definitely get smart to that.
Okay. Okay. Well, great. I appreciate all the insight that you've shared with us today. It really helps take away some of the mystery to this new critter, this critter that's new to us. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered that might inform people a little bit better about wolves in California?
Boy, there's a lot there, so I don't even know where to begin. But I think like maybe it would be important to note that that California, the department for sure, is very, very serious and very committed to working with folks on the ground to try to I guess the way I see it is wolves obviously are coming to the state of California. They're going to continue to come. And our charge is, how are we going to help make this work the best that we can for as many folks as we can out there? So, of course, I'm really busy with the wolf side of it, but very busy with the people side of it too.
Great. Well, Kent, thank you for your time. Welcome to California, and you have a big project ahead of you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope that worked for you.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.